annexing occupied Palestinian territory. Israel's Prime Minister wants to seize more of the West Bank and the Jordan Valley. Palestinians and their allies denounce yet another land grab. Will the seizure spark more Middle East turmoil? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finighan. The West Bank and East Jerusalem are at the heart of any future Palestinian state, but occupied by Israeli forces since 1967 and now threatened by annexation, Palestinian dreams of their own homeland look increasingly impossible. Israel's Prime Minister wants to declare sovereignty over illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank and the Jordan Valley. Benjamin Netanyahu wanted to begin annexation now, at the beginning of July, but his coalition government partner Benny Gantz says combating the coronavirus should come first. The Palestinian leadership, major EU countries and Arab states all object to annexation. But the seizure of more Palestinian land is seen to be in line with Donald Trump's proposals for peace in the region.
With Avi Berkowitz, Ambassador Friedman and members of their delegation, I spoke about the question of sovereignty, which we are working on now and over the coming days.
Our correspondents in West Jerusalem and Ramallah are following events. We'll start with Al Jazeera's Harry Fawcett.
The 1st of July was the first date available to Benjamin Netanyahu under the terms of his coalition deal with his former rival Benny Gantz to start making real moves on annexation. But he gave a pretty clear indication on the way in that he wasn't yet ready to do so, saying that there were days at least of talks still required with the United States. And some of his own ministers from his own party have been giving interviews suggesting it could be a matter of weeks, not days. Certainly the Blue and White Party of Benny Gantz wants to see any annexation put on hold until coronavirus and the fallout economically of the pandemic are dealt with. The Blue and White Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi giving an interview in which he said he wasn't aware of Netanyahu's intentions, but he wasn't expecting any imminent announcement, saying that the United States had yet to sign off on any final deal. And indeed, the US approval does seem to be the key stumbling block here. One Israeli TV channel reporting that the United States wants to see concessions made to the Palestinians at the same time as any annexation move. That could be difficult for Netanyahu to sell to his right-wing supporters, particularly if he also has to endorse the Trump plan in its entirety, which of course also includes a Palestinian state. Harry Fawcett for Inside Story, West Jerusalem.
Let's hear now from Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim in Ramallah on the Palestinian reaction.
Annexation is still on the table, whether it's delayed, partial or gradual. For them, it's seen as the final blow to the two-state solution. We've spoken to the PLO Secretary General Saeb Erekat, and this is what he had to tell us.
If he annexes any part of the West Bank, partially, comprehensively, whatever it is, I believe the Palestinian Authority will be destroyed, and Netanyahu will be responsible and shoulder his responsibilities in accordance with the 4th Geneva Conventions of 1949, meaning he will collect the garbage in Nablus, Hebron, Jerusalem, Rafah, Khan Yunis, Jericho, etc. We will not sit on a table where the American-Israeli plan is on the table. This is not a peace plan. Trump-Netanyahu is not a peace plan. It's an annexation, apartheid, dictation plan, and we will not sit on any table.
Uncertainty is not only related to the timing or the areas, but the future of Palestinians in lands that are marked for annexation. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that these Palestinians won't be receiving Israeli citizenship, and Palestinians warn that annexation could make an already bad situation even worse. Just to give you an idea of how bad the situation is, Israeli settlers have erected 2 illegal outposts in the occupied West Bank in the south and in the north. Now, Palestinians are pushing foreign diplomats to try and put pressure on Israel to stop its annexation plans, and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has announced in May that the PLO has stopped all and is not bound by any agreements with the US and Israel, including cutting security coordination with Israel. Nida Ibrahim for Inside Story.
Palestinians say that annexation formalizes a land grab which has gone on for decades. Around 250 illegal Israeli settlements and outposts have been built over the past 50 years, all in violation of international law. A separation wall cutting through Palestinian territory in the occupied West Bank has been built over the past 18 years. The planned annexation would include the Jordan Valley, a main agricultural and water source for Palestinians. Israel's actions were recently boosted by a major shift in US policy. The Trump administration announced that the settlements are not illegal and endorsed annexation. The White House also recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the US embassy there. Let's bring in our guests then for today's discussion. We have with us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank, Dr Mustafa Barghouti, leader of the Palestinian National Initiative, and a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. From Washington, D.C., Saeed Arakat, adjunct professor at the American University in Washington, as well as the Washington, D.C. bureau chief of the Al-Quds daily newspaper, published in occupied East Jerusalem. And from West Jerusalem, Amichai Stein, political writer and diplomatic correspondent. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you all. Amichai, let's start with you. As we record our discussion, it is late afternoon, Wednesday, July 1st, the date set by Netanyahu to take the first steps towards annexation, and yet there's no sign of if, how and when he intends to proceed. Why is that?
He's waiting, first of all, for a green or some kind of green light from Washington, D.C. We had this week a big group here of the U.S. Special Envoy Avi Berkovich, a Special Envoy to the Middle East, that has had 3 days of talks, 4 days of talks over here, and he's with Ambassador Friedman and with Gantz, Netanyahu, Ashkenazi. They all talk together, try to get some kind of decision, and now they're back in Washington, and we are waiting to hear from Washington what exactly is going to happen. Until now, like you said, we are not expecting some kind of an announcement from the Prime Minister today. It still might be, but at this point, we do not know yet. Yesterday, he said we're going to work on it in the next few days, meaning also he doesn't know exactly what kind of green light will there be, and if there will be a green light. There's suddenly a report that the U.S. Might want Netanyahu to give something to the Palestinians if he makes decision to annex parts of the West Bank. So at this point, we really don't know when and if something is going to happen. We're still, like everyone, waiting.
Dr Barghouti, do you feel that it's a matter of when and not if Israel will proceed with annexation? To what extent is the US administration key to how Netanyahu moves forward now?
Unfortunately, this American administration, Mr. Trump's administration, has made itself a partner in a war crime with Israel. A war crime that includes annexation of occupied territories in violation of every international law, and a war crime in the sense that Israel is practically and strategically, by building illegal settlements, by annexing Jerusalem, is killing the very last opportunity of Palestinian statehood, and has created already a system of apartheid that is much worse than what prevailed in South Africa. So the issue here is not about tactical issues, whether it will happen on the 1st of July or 10th of July or 15th of July. The issue here is about a whole Israeli strategy that has to be stopped and has to be changed. A strategy that is aiming at liquidating Palestinian rights and at creating a system of ghettos and bantustans, which already exist. 224 ghetto stands in the West Bank and a big one in Gaza. You already mentioned the apartheid wall. You mentioned 250 illegal settlements and the 650 military checkpoints. The whole system must be changed. And we will never stop struggling for our freedom till this occupation is over, until this system of apartheid and racial discrimination is finished.
Saeed Arakat, has international condemnation of Israel's stated intentions and talk of US appeals to slow down with this got anything to do with the fact that Netanyahu has moved forward today? I mean, so far the international community has huffed and puffed and at issue strong words. Will it do anything like introduce punitive sanctions against Israel if it does move forward with annexation plans?
Well, there's been a great deal of condemnation, Adrian. I mean, we've heard this over the years. Israel has practiced creeping annexations for the better part of the last 5 decades. So there's nothing new, except for one thing, that, while American administrations, let's say, in particular in the past, has kept some sort of a daylight between them and the Israeli position, but the Trump administration has completely gone along and eliminated whatever daylight there was between the American administration and the Israeli position. So they have adopted Netanyahu's position. It is clearly stated in the deal of the century in the so-called peace plan announced last January. It does give Israel the right to annex 30% of the occupied West Bank. So there is nothing new. There's been a great deal of pressure from America's allies in the region, America's allies in Europe and so on, to slow down. So while, at least for today, there seems to be no major announcements on annexations, I believe that the process is going forward and exactly as Netanyahu wanted. One other thing, the calendar is very important to Netanyahu because he knows the U.S. is moving towards an election where it is quite possible that Trump's opponent, former Vice President Joe Biden, could win this election. And he did announce that he was opposed to annexation. So chances are, knowing Netanyahu, knowing what he's done in the past, that this process will move forward.
Amichai Stein, what's the mood within Netanyahu's coalition right now? Will he be taking into consideration any misgivings by the alternate Prime Minister, Benny Gantz?
So if it were only dependent on Netanyahu would go to implement the Israeli law on 30% of the areas. But Gantz started saying this week, for example, that this is not the main issue of the Israeli government, that you need to talk about COVID-19. And it seems that maybe Gantz understood politically that Netanyahu isn't exactly going to ask him what he agrees on. At the beginning, we know the U.S. government wanted some kind of a consensus between the two parts of the Israeli government. But now it seems also from the statements of Netanyahu that he's going ahead with some kind of annexation, even though Gantz might oppose it. So that's the situation right now. It seems that the attempts to formulate some kind of consensus, this is, you can throw it away. Maybe the Americans still want it, but it seems this is not, at least from the outside talk of the two, this is not a possibility right now. And the question is like you said, what will happen if Gantz doesn't want annexation and Netanyahu does want? Will it cause a rift in the government? So the big question is, will it pass in the end? Because the two agreed during the coalition agreement that they don't need to agree about an annexation to go through with it. This is the only issue. They don't need an agreement. But the question is, what will happen when you bring it to the government to a vote and maybe it falls because blue and white Gantz party won't agree to it? So that's the political rift. But it seems, again, you're asking if Netanyahu is looking what Gantz is saying about annexation. At this point, it seems we are past the stage. Netanyahu is in talks with the Americans. He also said, I'm talking with the Americans. Blue and white is not an issue in the decision-making on this.
Dr. Barghouti, if annexation in any form goes ahead, what will be the impact on the process that began 27 years ago? We heard Saeb Erekat at the beginning of the program saying that the PA will be destroyed. Would annexation of the West Bank leave the peace process dead, no hope of revival?
The peace process is already dead. And Oslo agreement is dead because Netanyahu killed it. And he has been acting in that direction since 1993, when he aggravated the Israeli public against Yitzhak Rabin and practically caused his assassination by an Israeli extremist who listened to Netanyahu. And Netanyahu made his plans very clear in his book, A Place Under the Sun, which negated the whole Oslo process and practically spoke about the whole of the West Bank as an Israeli land. Since then, he systematically destroyed every peace possibility, every chance for two-state solution. And in my opinion, today the agreements are dead. Oslo agreement is dead. The security coordination, as I know, is dead. So practically, this is all the outcome of what Netanyahu does. The annexation itself makes it impossible for any Palestinian state to be created. The annexation, if it happens, means that Israel has declared itself as a country of apartheid, as a system of apartheid in the 21st century, a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa, a system based on racial discrimination. That is the meaning of annexation. And this would mean a lot to Palestinians. First of all, it's the end, of course, of the Palestinian Authority. And it means that Palestinians have to unify their abilities and their forces together and conduct the widest possible popular nonviolent resistance to Israeli occupation. But also it means the rise of a very powerful boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign against the Israeli government and its policies. But more than that, it could mean strategically a change of the Palestinian goal. If Israel kills the possibility of two-state solution, we have no alternative but to demand one democratic state solution with equal national and civil rights. And that one democratic state will not be Jewish only. Impossible. Today, the number of Palestinians living on the land of historic Palestine is equal, if not a little bit more than the Israeli Jewish people. And that means one state with equality does not mean the situation that you have today. Right. That is the exact strategic change that could take place. Right. But for the time being, the most important thing is for the world to say to Israel, if you proceed with annexation, you will face real sanctions.
Said Arakat, what do you make of what you just heard there? And I need you to give me the reactions to that, because there's another question I want to ask you in just a moment.
Well, very quickly, Dr. Barghouti says it correctly. I mean, the Oslo process really ceased to exist. There was supposed to be a Palestinian state by 1999. That never happened. Then the Oslo Accords were virtually destroyed when, Sharon marched into Ramallah in 2000 and then, occupied and surrounded former President Yasser Arafat for a long, long time, and so on. They overtook many other places. So it only exists really in sort of rhetoric and in terms of coordination, basically security coordination between the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis. So to really effectuate the Oslo process or the outcome of the Oslo process that should have been crowned with a Palestinian state has gone a long, long time ago. So that is no longer viable. Okay. I think that also what Dr. Barghouti said, that, it is really, it behooves the Palestinians to look at what they have, to look at how they can resist, what to fight for, to espouse perhaps, a notion articulated by the great American journalist Bill Moyer. He says, when injustice is law, then resistance is duty. And you have to come up with a creative way to resist this system of apartheid that is, wholly supported, totally supported.
Professor, let's just suppose for a moment that Israel doesn't go ahead with annexation for whatever reason. Would the Palestinians, as the Jerusalem Post suggested today, be willing, do you think, then, under those circumstances, to come back to negotiations?
To come back to what? I mean, let's remember, Adrian, that the last time there were negotiations was in 2014. And the Israelis had agreed, that was during the 9-month period under Secretary of State John Kerry, if you recall. They were supposed to release, let's say, U.S. president that should have been released way back in 1994. And they didn't, because they don't really want to negotiate anything with the Palestinians. Israel has always used negotiations just to, create facts on the ground, to annex more land, to make it impossible for a Palestinian state to emerge, which we are where we are now. So I think that when the Palestinians say negotiate, go back to the negotiating table, what are they negotiating? I mean, you know, the parameters and the framework for these negotiations have been determined a very, very long time ago. You know, but every time you restart the negotiations, Israel starts from the point where things are now. So the Palestinians, before going into negotiations, they need to state exactly what they expect at the end of an outcome, what they expect at the end of that negotiation to be. I believe that Israel will not allow a Palestinian state to emerge. The two-state solution has long been, since, you know, really relegated to an unachievable goal.
Amichai Stein, as we said at the beginning, here we are, July 1st. Nothing has happened yet. As we record this programme late afternoon on Wednesday. To what extent is Netanyahu's annexation policy, do you think, a distraction tactic to divert attention from his indictment on corruption charges? If I think I understand you correctly, what you said in your last answer is that it's not yet a done deal. It might not happen.
Netanyahu is looking at two previous, you know, Israeli prime minister. You know, he's looking at, let's say, at Ben Gurion. He always speaks about it. Netanyahu is right now the longest prime minister in Israel, and he's looking also at Olmert, and he's asking himself, how can I really, you know, leave something for the history? How will I be remembered? That's I think one of the main questions he's leading him. He's also the son of an historian. So he's asking himself, he feels always, he talks about Iran, preventing Iran from nuclear weapons. He talks historically. So I think for him, yes, for him, doing some kind of implementation of the Israeli law is some kind of leaving a mark on the history book, because other than that, you know, he might be remembered maybe as the first, like you said, as the first prime minister that is being indicted. So I don't know, I wouldn't call it as a distraction, but I would call it his willingness really to go into the history books as someone who did a step that will be remembered in history and won't be remembered like Olmert, for example, although Olmert attacked the Syrian nuclear core and other issues, he doesn't want to remember as a prime minister, you know, indicted for bribe. He wants to be remembered as a prime minister who did steps on the ground.
Mustafa Barghouti, what do you think are Netanyahu's motivations here? And if and when Israel moves forward with its stated intention, what will annexation look like? Will it begin gradually in phases, or fearing that its ally in the White House may not be re-elected in November, do you think it will go further and more quickly?
Well, listen, the issue here is not about Netanyahu. Practically what we face here is a strategy followed by the whole Zionist movement. The party that initiated settlement activities was the Labour Party, which is, by the way, now part of the Israeli government that wants to annex the occupied territories. Likud, Labour Party, Blue and White, they're all parts of one Zionist movement. And the problem here is that the Zionist movement is sending one message to the Palestinian people, that it was an illusion to think you can reach a compromise with us, and that the two-state solution, which represents practically a painful compromise for the Palestinians, since they would have gotten only a state that is 22% of historic Palestine, while the United Nations decided we should have 44%. Nevertheless, the Zionist movement is saying we're not going to have a compromise. So Palestinians will make the conclusion, and they are making the conclusion. You don't want a compromise? Fine. We'll go back to one democratic state in the whole area of Palestine, of historic Palestine. Netanyahu, of course, has certain personal motivations. He's indicted on 4 issues of corruption. He might want to leave certain legacy. He might want to play with time. That's all possible. But the main thing that I want the audience to understand here, that whether it's Netanyahu or Sharon or the leader of the Labour Party, it's the problem of the Zionist movement that does not believe that we, the Palestinians, are equal people to the Israeli Jewish people, that does not believe that we are equal human beings, and that uses discrimination as an official policy of the state of Israel. And that is very clear in the state national law that they have approved.
Okay. Gentlemen,
this is unacceptable. Apartheid will not last.
We are out of time. We have to make room for the news bulletin in a couple of moments. Many thanks indeed to you all for taking part in the discussion today. Mustafa Barghouti, Saeed Arakat and Amakai Stein. As always, thank you for watching. Don't forget you can see the programme again at any time just by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, you can join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, and you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian, Finighan, and the whole team here in Doha, thanks for being with us. We'll see you again. Bye for now.